if we have a look at these two pictures of Mr. Gross, who define the modal model of emotional regulation. In the first one, he's regulating very well. You would actually have no idea that his woman done left him and his damn dog just died. In the second one, he's emotionally regulating less well. Okay, he's anxious in the spotlight and he's passing that anxiety on. Now, basically, emotional self-regulation is not a very Western way of doing things. In that we tend in the Western world to think that we should just let it all hang out emotionally. And what it does is it aligns to more Easterly philosophies, where to be in control of one's emotion is perceived to be a very, very important thing. And self-regulation itself separates into two distinct areas. There's effortful control, which I'll just glance at, and then emotional regulation itself. Both of them, however, involve one specific skill, which is the ability to inhibit a dominant response and to perform a subdominant response. So if you think back to the kids freaking out with the crap Christmas presents, they're not inhibiting that dominant response, and the dominant response is to go like that. A subdominant one would be to activate, oh, it's just what I've always wanted. Now, if we have a look at Wayne and Waynetta here, they fail to manage their attention, they fail to inhibit dominant behaviors, and they fail to activate subdominant behaviors, and that's to an extent why their lives are a mess. But if you're talking about kids in AP, that often these young people will be very, very bad at self-regulation. And actually, equally, these young people have really quite low status. And you can see how being able to regulate yourself emotionally would lead to you having high status, because it's going to lead to you being successful at work. But equally, you can see how having low status would actually cause you to be poor at self-regulation. With every situation, so for instance, if somebody taps me like that, okay, or pokes me like that, okay, that's a situation. It's going to draw my attention to what they're doing, okay? And I'm going to appraise what they're doing, and I'm going to respond. Now, my response is going to cause situational change, okay? So if I turn around and say, get out of my face, man, that's going to change the situation. Equally, if I turn around and go, can I help you? That's also going to alter the situation. So at every single one of these stages, you can actually attempt to self-regulate. You know, what you can do to an extent with kids, but there's also the emotional self-regulation for the teachers, is that proactively, and this is antecedent focused, if you can identify a situation that is likely to result in an emotional response, then you can choose to avoid it. Because if you avoid or if you disengage, it's less likely that you're going to get in trouble. The 5-point regulation scales were designed for autistic kids to just assess their level of arousal. And one of the ways you can use these with children is a 5-point scale pocket activity, where you put a whole series of things that they might like or they might upset them, and just assess whether they make the kids happy, comfortable, nervous, mad, or distressed, but putting with them one-on-one those activities into certain pockets. So I will sit with that child and I will assess my behavior. I'll talk about my behavior with the child. And I'll say, look, is there anything that I do that upsets you? And in the left-hand column, we'll write down the things that I do that they find upsetting. And then we'll look at the impact on the child. So for instance, if a teacher is prone to shouting, okay, if we write that in the left-hand column and we look at the impact on the child, and the child says, well, it reminds me of my dad who was abusive, then we have to just do a simple yes or no answer. Is that impact on the child acceptable or not acceptable? And at early stages of the relationship with the class, I do a thing called META-BEHAVIOUR management. And I'll just exemplify this. So if I've got one kid there and another kid there talking to each other and not focused on their work, I'll go in between them, but I'll go in between them whilst narrating. Okay, so I go, right, what I'm doing now is called sitting between the combatants. And whenever you move forward, I'm going to move forward as well. Why am I doing that? So that you can't communicate, okay? Right? And then, okay, now I've blocked off your ability to communicate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sit slightly back, okay? And you won't be able to see me, but I'll be watching you. So meta behavior management is where you use really quite simple behavior management techniques, but you narrate what you're doing. But it's about choosing the right stage of a cycle of reactive anger to de-escalate. So there's two forms of anger, reactive and manipulative anger. Reactive anger is perfectly normal, not necessarily unhealthy, and it always follows the same pattern. Manipulative anger, or manipulative aggression, is where the darker stuff lies, and it's goal-seeking, it's proactive, and it's anger with a high IQ. When you are in receipt of manipulative anger, you must use attentional deployment. Transference is where somebody reminds you of somebody else. So, you know, I've had this with a particularly difficult student that I was brought into a school to help manage him. And I just reminded him of his dad, and I could tell. So transference is where somebody reminds you of somebody else, and you superimpose that person's qualities onto the teacher. If I can make a kid laugh at the point at which they're showing arousal of reactive anger, then it stops them being angry. So yes, we said, what about the work? But equally, this works too. What about my ball patch? And the kid's going, what? What are you talking about your ball patch? What about the fact that my mum still buys my clothes and I'm like 55 years of age? And what about this? My mum's been dead for 5 years. What about that? And the kid's going, what are you talking about your mum for? What about this? Which picture were you most drawn to look at and why? Now, I'm going to tell you, because I'm old, I was drawn immediately to the picture of the smiling young girl. And the reason for that, because old people are really good at that, is we are less led by informational processing than we are for effect. So we're more interested, as we get older, in our happiness. And we can quite easily tune out the aggressive phase. Younger people, and here's fascinating, are more likely to be attracted to the congruent gaze, which means if somebody is angry, they are more likely to be attracted to an angry face, more likely to focus on an angry face rather than a happy one. Now, with all of these things, they're either actively expressed or passively expressed. With all of things, we go cold, we avoid, we don't hit a negative with a negative. And then once we've gone cold, we ask ourselves this pivotal question: what reward does this behavior seek? And once we've identified the reward the behavior seeks, simple as toast, we don't give it, we take the reward away. If a kid's really, really horrible to you and points out that you're really, really ugly and you smell and your breath smells, what do they want? They want you to be upset. So consequently, what do? We don't give that to them. Yeah, I know I've got the face only a mother could love. Yeah, I've been ugly all my life, and it's a terrible burden. So there's always a chance in any situation to be